Thor from the Marvel Cinematic Universe has always been a mixed bag for me, though Thor's continual striving to be worthy of something greater than himself is something that I can always relate to. As a recent graduate from Utah Valley University's film school, I shall like to pass along some notes to Taika Waititi concerning his latest Thor adventure. Thor is told to be worthy. Worthy of what? Everything centers around whether he can pick up his hammer and be a proper defender of the 9 realms that his kingdom of Asgard rules over. However, his life seems a cyclical one, mired in tragedy, as he fails time and time again to defend those he cares about. There can be no fulfillment in protecting people who will die due to your failures. Deaths which come at the hands of his adopted brother, a dark elf, his long-lost sister, or a mad titan, which only deepen the sting of failure. When Thor has no one left to defend what defines him. In the first movie, he was banished to Earth due to his arrogance. He could only return after learning humility and becoming worthy. Along the way, he found love with the Earth scientist Jane Foster. In the second movie, the pressure and expectations that he would become king after his father became too much for him to bear, and he walked away from it all.
I'd rather be a good man than a great king.
The third movie reinvented Thor. Instead of being somber and stoic all the time, he had now developed a light-hearted, humorous side, a way to cope with the tragedy he had experienced. With that, director Taika Waititi took the character to not just his most light moments, but also his most tragic. He loses his father, his hammer is destroyed, he is stranded on a gladiator planet, and returns to Asgard only to find that his long-lost sister had killed many of his people. The only way to stop her was to destroy his homeland, in causing Ragnarok. All along the way, he also loses an eye. The point is, he lost more in this movie than all his previous appearances combined in the MCU. Despite the loss, the movie's otherwise traumatic moments were contemplated by Thor's desire to play Get Help.
We are not doing Get Help.
Get help! Please! My brother's dying! Get help! Help him!
The film ended with Thor finally living up to his father by taking the throne and committing to defending Asgard to the end of time. While many MCU movies have tarnished tragic moments with comedy, Taika made sure to keep the humorous scenes as comedic and the sad scenes as tragic. Taika later would perfect this method in his next movie, Oscar-winning Jojo Rabbit. And following the announcement that Batman himself, Christian Bale, would be playing one of Thor's most iconic villains, Gore the God Butcher, I was excited to see what Taika would bring to the fourth film, Thor: Love and Thunder. But then I saw it.
What is this?
I would love to see movie critic Joe Blow do a "what the F happened to this movie" for this movie. I am not sure if it was the tight deadline or he bumped his head on something, but this movie failed in so many ways. I don't want to take anything away from you if you enjoyed the movie. However, for me, this was the one MCU movie that made me say, yeah, I'm done with Marvel. Love and Thunder's comedy was often all the way over the top, annoying, and ruined what should be otherwise a poignant moment. Like making jokes about Jane's cancer, or turning the ultimate weapon of mass destruction that killed off half the universe into an ice cream store. In the real world, the Japanese would never tolerate the inappropriateness of a cotton candy store with confections in the shape of the nuclear bomb blast. So why do it here? And those goats, my gosh, those goats were never funny the first time, and by the fourth time, I wanted to chop them up into minced stew.
I'm putting them down.
I have a unique and discerning sense of humor, but other reviewers agree that this movie was not funny. Let's go through the movie a little at a time to highlight the occasional highs and frequent lows. Since this is a religious philosophy channel, let's talk about Thor: Love and Thunder's philosophy and how reworking that philosophical view might have made a better movie. The movie begins with a promising opening to Gore's origin story as he wanders through a barren desert in search of water for his dying daughter. He prays to his god, but hears no response. Soon the daughter passes, and we watch a grieving Gore bury her and lay by her side, his mental stability at a breaking point. Bale's acting is superfluous, yet heartbreaking. But then he comes across a tropical oasis that seems to come out of nowhere. While indulging himself, he soon comes across the god of Saturday Night Live comedy sketches. This god tells him that his only purpose is to suffer. Some might say the same about the god they claim to worship, and feel betrayed by that god. The Necro's sword chooses Gorr, and he kills the god, the only god that we see killed on screen. Here, Taika introduces the central theme of the story. Gorr's god's rejection of him caused him, in turn, to reject and kill him. It was hate triumphing over love. He then dedicates himself to killing all gods, because in his mind, no god is worthy. It is a philosophy espoused by many atheists called misotheism. They posit that if God exists, we should hate him for putting us on earth just to suffer. The intro scene seemingly asks, is there a god worthy of worship, or can there ever be one? After the previous films had established Thor finally becoming worthy, Thor would be an excellent ethical challenge to Gorr's philosophy. However, the story never follows this thing. It would have been intriguing to show the Norse age, when people did worship Thor, and show him answering prayers. This might have contradicted Gorr's philosophy. Taika seems most interested, however, in keeping this movie a love story between Thor and Jane. He could have done both, perhaps. The way he met his first lover was in response to prayer. Instead, we get a recap of Thor's journey up to this point, post-Avengers Endgame, highlighting all the romantic interests, including Jane Foster, that he had over the 1500 years he's been alive. I chuckled at the sight of Thor's mom carrying Breaking Dawn levels of bad CGI baby Thor into battle. But then, again, that was the only time I did chuckle. Jumping to present day, we see Thor working out of his fat acceptance body into the most fit body he has ever had for any of the films he appeared in. He has lost too much and simply wants to meditate and battle for the rest of his life. We are presented with a Thor who has stopped trying to look for love for fear that they may break his heart again from loss. In Avengers Endgame, he decided to cease being king as he wasn't a good one due to his depression. So instead he handed the kingdom over to Valkyrie, who named herself King because apparently the feminine version, being queen, is perceived as inferior. Pushing traditionally male titles on females when an equivalent gender-specific and not inferior or demeaning title exists seems rather unnecessary. In an entertaining battle sequence, Thor fights to defend People's Temple from some owl thugs, but ends up destroying the temple in the process. This could have been an example of Thor answering someone's prayers, but nothing indicates that. Instead, we have a Thor who has to repeat his arc of the previous movies and relearn to be worthy. Instead of Taika presenting Thor as a god worthy of worship, instead we are presented with a childish, brutish moron throughout the film. This is probably because the movie was reportedly written by a 7-year-old. Thor learns from the people he just saved that their gods have fallen silent, and they are not sure why. From here we see Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy receiving distress signals from many places over the whole galaxy, and then watching news feeds of many dead gods that Gorr butchered. This moment could have been so much more impactful by showing instead a montage of Thor going to these places and seeing in person each of the dead gods. Thor then would eventually find his old friend Sif on the brink of death at one of these places. In the movie, the scene is played for laughs more so than anything else, as both Thor and Sif joke about her missing arm getting into Valhalla and not her.
'Tis but a scratch. A scratch? Your arm's off. No, it isn't. Well, what's that then?
I would have written this scene to have Thor making witty quips to cope with a terrible situation, and Sif would play the straight woman, telling him to take this seriously. She narrowly survived an encounter with Gorr, and should be shocked and frightened by it all. But instead, we don't get that at all. While Christian Bale's performance is creepy on screen, when he was off screen, I never saw him that way. None of the characters treated him like someone to be genuinely feared. Perhaps it was Sif's bad acting. But back on Earth, in New Asgard, after a terrible play that goes on for way too long and contributes absolutely nothing to the story, cancer-ridden Jane takes Thor's smashed hammer, thinking it would cure her cancer. But instead, we later learn that the hammer only accelerates her disease. This would have been a great thread to intertwine with Gorr, who was likewise dying from his own weapon of choice. But instead, we only get Gorr briefly mentioning it to Jane, and the theme dissolves into nothing. In a tremendous, frightening sequence, Gorr the God Butcher arrives on Earth with the creatures he summoned using the Necro's sword. I here applaud Taika for his genius idea of taking children's drawings of scary monsters and using them for inspiration. Thor meets Jane on the battlefield, and they drive Gorr away, but not before he kidnaps the town's children in retaliation. The previous Thor movies didn't do much for Thor and Jane's romance, so Taika included a montage of Thor and Jane's romance that was adorable to watch, though was often ruined by his narration. The quirky aspects of their relationship were the heart of the movie. Jane trying to figure out a good catchphrase was often just cute. We now should talk about Thor treating his old hammer like an ex-lover and his axe as being jealous. Never before had Thor treated his inanimate weapons as people, yet suddenly we are asked to consider that these weapons not only have feelings but also attachments. The humor played only makes Thor look foolish and is entirely unneeded for the story. Thor, Jane, Korg, and Valkyrie travel to the elegantly designed Omnipotent City to warn the gods of Gore and possibly recruit them to fight him. Thor talks about how Zeus has always been an idol of his and how he couldn't wait to meet him. But upon meeting Zeus, Thor is humiliated on stage and watches as a prideful Zeus takes no interest in his plight. Zeus initially claims that Gore was no big deal because he only killed minor gods up to that point, but up close reveals that all the gods are scared of Gore and are keeping to their city to stay safe. Here I ask the question, why? As a rule, show don't tell. I have no reason to believe that Zeus and the other gods are afraid of Gore. As we see in the final showdown, all that is needed to take out Gore is Thor, a cancer-ridden Jane, and many Thor-endowed kids. If Zeus and several other powerful gods face Gore, they surely could beat him. At any moment in this scene on Omnipotent City, I was eagerly anticipating the arrival of Gore to prove Zeus wrong, and that there is indeed nowhere safe for him or the other gods. This would have been the perfect moment in the movie to show how much the audience should fear Gore, but the opportunity is lost. Something interesting does happen, however, in this scene. After a brawl between Team Thor and the guards, Korg is killed. In a rage, Thor kills Zeus with his own lightning bolt, and I thought, oh crap, this has so many crazy implications from now on. What does it mean that Thor just killed a god? Is he becoming like the Gore, the god butcher? Will the other gods retaliate? Is Thor going to have a deep, reflective, somber, contemplative moment about this? Nope, nothing like this ever happens. Instead, they only joke about it. And as it turns out, Korg, who is only in the movie because he is Taika's character, didn't die, and oh, Zeus didn't die either, as revealed in the mid-credits scene. He's fine. A thunderbolt through the chest, it's just a flesh wound. So that whole philosophical dilemma went down the toilet in a hurry. That was Love and Thunder's biggest intellectual failure. In a beautifully intimate scene with a stirring performance, Thor confronts Jane. After a light moment and some romantic banter, Jane finally reveals to Thor that she has cancer. Thor wants to spend as much time as he can with her anyways, before she passes on. Then follows the most cinematic sequence in the movie as they enter a mostly black and white world to confront Gore. Gore still attempts to connect to Thor by talking about how they were both rejected by their idols. This scene could have been strengthened by introducing how Thor seemingly killed Zeus. He then turns to Valkyrie to talk about how the gods didn't help her when she witnessed her fellow Valkyries being slaughtered by Hela, Thor's half-sister. Seeing her struggle with this would have been interesting, but she never does. Her tears indicate that part of her agrees with Gore's philosophy, but again, this goes nowhere. After a thrilling battle sequence, Valkyrie is severely injured, Jane is hospitalized due to her cancer, and Thor loses his axe to Gore, who needed it to open the path to a being called Eternity, one who would grant his wish to kill all the gods in an instant. After another terribly weak joke, Thor tells Jane to remain in bed and savor her last moments as he goes off again to confront Gore. But without his axe, which can summon the Bifrost and portal his way to Gore, I wondered how was he going to get there? Super easy. Barely an inconvenience, as it turns out, as Zeus's Thunderbolt can teleport him there. As Thor finds the kidnapped children, he endows them with his power to fight the monsters in the most ridiculous ways possible. He sends the children to fight the adults' battles. Yes, good job. Good idea there. But this makes the monsters look weaker than previously portrayed. I get how this could have been a moment where a god lives up to those who idolize him, but it's too far stretched to work. As Gore is almost about to kill Thor, Jane swoops in at the last moment to save him, despite knowing that she might die. They beat Gore back, but he escapes through the portal to enter the realm of eternity. Thor and Jane follow, but as Jane falls at death's door and Gore is about to make his wish, Thor must now choose to love instead of hate. He tells Gore he will no longer fight and is content to die by Jane's side. Gore is moved by Thor and Jane's love, the fact that a god could really love a mortal, and so he chooses to restore his daughter instead of killing all the gods. But when he dies and Jane dies, Gore's daughter is left without her father to be raised by his enemy, a man whom she has never met nor has any reason to trust. It would have been more meaningful to have Gore take pity on Jane and ask eternity to heal her. He could then die and find that there is an afterlife for him where he reunites with his daughter. Though I suppose this wouldn't have worked since his god already told him there was no afterlife for his species. Still, choosing to save Jane and having her and Thor raise their own children as Love and Thunder would have made so much more sense than Thor raising the God Butcher's daughter. Thor Love and Thunder is not a bad movie, but a painfully mediocre one with loads of untapped potential. Ideas that could have evolved in emotionally profound ways are only given brief lip service and then quickly brushed aside as if they never happened. It feels like there is an epic, bold movie somewhere, but it keeps getting interrupted by people not caring enough about the plot and terrible jokes. The movie's strengths are in the quiet, intimate moments between Thor and Jane, highlighting their love, until the scene is unnecessarily distracted by bad humor. The theme of misotheism is poorly developed, as Gore spends more time scaring children than actually butchering gods. Thus, we never get a true sense of his total hatred of the gods. It never invokes any introspection in the viewer about their own relationship with deity. If we saw more of Gore's culture before they were killed by famine, we could have seen how some non-believers sometimes mocked Gore's devotion to his god during the famine. This would be similar to how Job's friends and wife mocked his beliefs while he was in the midst of great suffering. They would tell him to curse God and denounce him, but he would refuse to. They would continue to challenge his faith until he was the last of his people. Then it would be even more devastating when he finally met his god and discovered that his god finds him only to be easily replaceable, to which Gore would denounce him and kill him. Watching him attack the gods at the omnipotent city would have really driven home his hatred of the gods. Gore's people died in famine because their god was busy dealing, apparently, with the previous god butcher. This could have led to Gore's crusade only leaving more people to die of starvation and making him a hypocrite, but instead we get none of it. But to you, dear viewer, what do you think of this philosophy of misotheism? Did God put you on earth only to suffer and never become anything more than you are now? Should we hate God, or should we choose to love instead? It seems that when atheists bring up the problem of evil, they are not doing so out of ignorance. The atheist should understand that great triumphs make suffering worth it. Instead, the atheist is concerned with suffering only to suffer with no point. People want their suffering to mean something in the end. Who in their right mind would worship an all-knowing God who knew many of his creations would disbelieve in him, suffer, die, and then suffer some more in endless torment? Why would he not create us differently? Apparently, atheists, according to the Protestant Christians, if they do not accept Christ on their deathbed, are only made to suffer and then suffer more in hell. This is a foolish, arrogant, and childish God who hates to lose. So in order to win, he created losers without end. I refuse to worship or give devotion to such a God. The message of Thor Love and Thunder, were I the film's director, would have been to reject any god who created you who suffer without end. Worship God only if he created you not for his pleasure, but to bring to pass your immortality and eternal life, thereby giving your trials meaning. God gives you the treasures of heaven if in mortal life you endure all things. Worship God only if he promises you life in the halls of Valhalla after dying on the fields of battle. Suppose you disagree with anything I discussed here, tell me about it in the comments below. What would you have done if you directed Thor Love and Thunder? If you want to support the channel, please consider smashing that like button with a hammer, subscribe to the channel, and clicking the bell icon to be notified about future videos, and share it with someone who needs it. Thank you so much for watching through to the end, you few beautiful people, and remember to keep it righteous.